Max Lucado has been named America's Pastor by Christianity Today magazine and America's Best Preacher by Reader's Digest. He's the author of over 60 books with over 65 million copies in print and published in over 30 languages worldwide. That's pretty amazing for someone who was rejected by 14 publishers. Max is here today to talk about his latest book, Grace, More Than We Deserve, Greater Than We Imagine. So why did you write this book?
You know, grace, the theme of grace, I think is so immense, so immense. I think, though, it is God's best idea, and I think it's our fondest thought. And so if we can think about God's best idea and why it's such a wondrous thing and why grace is so important, and the more we think about it, the more it changes us. Grace is God's radical commitment to change people and prepare them for heaven, for the life to come. And if I can think on that more, it changes me from the inside out. So that's, I guess, a long answer to your question, why did I write it? I just think it's a lifelong quest that all of us have to think about and ponder God's wonderful grace.
So personally, you mentioned that grace changes you. So in your life, how has grace really touched you?
I think all of us experience some similar forms of grace. The first is forgiveness. We have to trust God to forgive us. Many people live in guilt. They live in guilt. They've never allowed God to forgive them for decisions they've made or mistakes they've made, and they live in guilt. And so grace begins with God's forgiveness. But grace doesn't stop there. Grace continues with the presence of God in our hearts. You know, I always believed that God was with me, that God was near me, that God was for me, all these other prepositions. But the preposition that I think is most powerful is that God is in us, that He actually decides, I'm going to take up residence in this dear daughter of mine, and she's going to learn to speak as I speak and think as I think. And we get to the point where we have the mind of Christ. Our hands are the hands of Christ. It's a wonderful thing. You know, it's kind of like God taking over. So grace must include this. It begins with forgiveness, but it continues with the presence of God in the heart of the believer.
Now, for those watching who maybe something's happened to them, and it's been so hard to forgive or extend grace, why is it so important? Why does God say it's so important that freely we've received grace, so freely we must give?
Mm-hmm. Two or three reasons. One is that hatred is a drug. We get addicted to it. It's an addictive drug. And so if you choose to select hatred instead of love, it's going to addict you and destroy you. Hatred is a poison that kills us. So it's for our own good, really. You know, even though it's hard to forgive somebody, in a way it's a selfish thing. For our own good, we should forgive because it makes us into mean people. Secondly, it's an act of faith. How can we say we believe in a God of love if we won't turn and love other people? This is a common question in Scripture. How can you say you believe in God whom you've never seen if you won't love your brother who you see all the time? So this is you might call forgiveness the firstborn child of grace. Because as I forgive, the natural response is to turn around and forgive someone else. I'm not saying it's easy. And I know there will be people who listen to this program who have suffered terribly at the hands of other people. And I'm not saying that what they did was right, because some of these people have been abused, abandoned, beaten. I'm not saying what they did was right. And I'm not saying when you forgive somebody, you're saying what they did was right. You're not endorsing their misbehavior. What you're saying is, I'm turning that person over to God. God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. So God will take care of that person. That's not my job, it's not yours. And so when you forgive somebody, you're saying, okay, I'm going to turn that person over to God, and I'm not going to let my heart become a heart of anger.
Because His grace is sufficient.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now for you, you are a pastor, you've authored so many books, bestseller, you're a husband, a father, a speaker, you do so much. Is grace your secret?
That's a great question. You know what? I find I'm learning more and more to listen to this presence of God in my heart, to believe He's there, and to trust Him. That if He gives me an assignment, He's also going to give me the strength. If He gives me the test, He's going to give me the strength to face the test. And I can honestly say, you know, here I'm 30 years into the ministry now. I know I don't look like it. Look, I'm brand new. I enjoy life more now than I ever have. I love ministry more than I ever have. I love preaching more than I ever have. And I think I'm going to run out of years before I run out of ideas. I really do. So is grace my secret? I don't know. But I tell you what, grace is the greatest discovery that I've ever made.